Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, is the son of RFK, or Bobby Kennedy, the son of former President John F. Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy, of course, was a freedom fighter in his own right. He was someone who dealt with poverty. In fact, America's war on poverty in the early 1960s is a product of Robert F. Kennedy Sr. So when we see R.F. Kennedy Jr., you're going to raise your eyes. You're going to ask some questions. You're going to say, well, is he potentially the right person to lead a left-wing push? Now, Democrats have been running scared of Joe Biden. They run scared of primary elections whenever there's a sitting president of their party. So people said, well, Robert Kennedy, yeah, you might be an interesting candidate. You might be an interesting left-wing candidate, interesting grassroots candidate, an interesting dark horse candidate, but it's not your time. RFK Jr. decided he was going to run anyway in the primary, which, by the way, I don't see as a bad strategy. I like the idea of insurgent candidates trying to have a primary challenge to the president. Not just running Green Party, not just running People's Party, not just running Communist Party, not just running Socialist Party, do all of that, but also force Joe Biden to campaign for his own nomination as president. Force him to the left in his own party. That's what F. Kennedy Jr. started to do. Of course, he didn't gain much traction, and we'll talk about why. And so he started going third party. And now he's a third party candidate with some money. He got a billionaire VP. But now, Mr. Kennedy has moved into another domain. Mr. Kennedy has decided that he is going to make a push for Black voters. He's made a decision that he is going to fight for the grassroots Black base. He's going to fight for those of us who care about Black nationalist issues. He said, I got something for you. And what does he have for us? Reparations. Bobby Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. comes out and says that he is going to give $5 billion to Black farmers. Now, there was a moment back in the past when Robert Kennedy Jr. was saying he didn't support reparations. He said it's obviously illegal or unconstitutional, excuse me. He said it's obviously unconstitutional. But now he's saying, well, $5 billion for Black farmers. He said this on his own podcast. I want you to take a listen to this. All right, we're going to listen to this and check him out and see what he said. Let me pull it. I'm going to pull it up from his own podcast. So I want people to say this is AI, this is false advertising. This is him on his own channel. Listen to this.
That $5 billion is not money that is an entitlement. It's money that was a loan that Black farmers were entitled to way back then and was stolen from them.
Courts already.
So he says $5 billion. It's not a loan. It's not a favor. It's what's owed to him. It's owed to us, excuse me. Oh, he's right. He's not wrong. We are owed that. So the strategy, the tactic, the argument is legitimate. Yes, Mr. Kennedy, you should absolutely be advocating for reparations, as should Joe Biden. It's as one of the readers here, a viewer said, it's a brilliant strategy. Why is it a brilliant strategy? Well, because he knows we're going to pay attention. He knows we're going to pay attention. And it stands in contrast to these other folks. Joe Biden refuses to take a principled stance on reparations. Joe Biden refuses to talk about reparations. Joe Biden in the 70s said that reparations was wrong. He said that Black people weren't owed reparations. He said, should I, as a white man, have to pay Black people money for something that happened before I was born? This is Joe Biden talking. And over time, he's learned to be more politically correct about it. Joe Biden has learned to say, well, we'll study it, we'll investigate it, we'll pick it apart. We'll have a congressional vote, not on reparations, but on a study. So we're going to vote to study the possibility of whether we should have reparations. This is where Joe Biden is. This is where the mainstream of the party. Obama wouldn't touch it. So to this extent, RFK Jr. is doing the right thing. Here's the problem. For one, he's not a true left-wing candidate. You don't run a left-wing candidacy or left-wing campaign with a billionaire VP. You don't run a left-wing campaign that is progressive except for Palestine. R.F. Kennedy Jr. has been speaking AIPAC talking points this entire election cycle, even before October 7th, but absolutely after October 7th. He has taken a ridiculously unprincipled stance, a ridiculously and absurdly non-progressive stance on Palestine. So in light of that, him coming up with reparations is encouraging, but I got to look at it sideways because there's very little about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that seems like a real insurgent radical campaign. This is not Cornel West's campaign. This is not Jill Stein's campaign. This ain't the Stein campaign, the West campaign, the Cruz campaign, the De La Cruz campaign. This ain't none of that. This is, to me, a cynical attempt to get the attention of the Black grassroots. Now, let's be clear, because I think it is important to talk about Black farmers. Black farmers are disenfranchised. Between 1920 and 1997, Black farmers were forced to give up their land and the income from that land that today would be worth $326 billion. This is the reality of Black farmers. The few farmers that are there today, they live off of credit. The credit keeps their businesses afloat. Lots of people deal with this, but they have to borrow against the harvest that's going to come in to pay for their equipment, to pay for animals, livestock, to pay for seeds and supplies, to pay the rent on their land, the mortgage on their land. They have to get credit to make ends meet when the price of commodities fluctuates or there's a weather disaster, a natural disaster that causes crop failure. And at the same time, they have to deal with all this stuff. Credit is the centerpiece of Black farmer life. Black farmers get denied loans more than everybody else. They get denied federal programs more than anybody else. I'm gonna tell you how bad it is. In 1920, Black farmers operated about 1/7 of all farm operations in the United States. My math ain't that good. Let me just do something real quick. 1/7. That's 14% of farm operations. Now, Black people make up about 13% of the population, so that made sense. We were proportionately representative of the farmers in America, right? About 13, 14%, 1/7. Now, Black farmers make up less than 2% of all farmers everywhere in the United States. This is a huge problem, but it's part of a bigger problem of the wealth gap between Black folk and white folk, right? Losing land isn't just losing a job, it's losing wealth. It's losing transferable wealth. It's losing intergenerational wealth. It's losing access to capital. The racial wealth gap is partially grounded in not having access to land. Black households right now make about 7 cents on the dollar in net worth compared to white households. 7 cents on the dollar. But again, wealth is not the same as income. Yes, we make less money in terms of our salary than white people, but we also have less property. We have less access to capital. We have less in the bank. All of these things. And so Black folk have had to long deal, and we'll do a whole deep dive on this one day, but when there was a depression, there was something called the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, which gave farmers subsidies in exchange for limiting production of certain crops, right? Uh, but the Department of Agriculture gave that to white farmers, or white landowners, excuse me, to keep government benefit payments from the, from basically they don't want to pass it to black farmers who are sharecropping. So what they did was they let white landowners have it and not black ones, right? At the same time, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration granted a disproportionate amount of the funding to white farmers, which left black farmers super vulnerable. And then in 1937, Roosevelt, the great New Deal, the great, social safety net president, created the FSA, which is the Farm Security Administration. It's part of the New Deal programs, but black farmers got fewer rehabilitation loans, fewer tenant purchase loans through the agency. And so there's a long history of black farmers being discriminated against. The Pickford lawsuits, if you don't know about them, in the 1980s and 1990s through the 20s and the aughts, these were class action lawsuits that were based on the USDA's discrimination against black farmers. And we could go on and on and on. Black farmers deserve reparations. Let's be clear about that. And black farmers also deserve far more than the $5 billion, a lot more than the $5 billion that Robert F. Kennedy is talking about, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is talking about. That's also a fact. But at least he's starting the conversation. But I just need y'all to be clear that although he is starting a conversation about reparations, even though he is taking the right position on this issue, one, it ain't enough, but two, I don't believe him. He needs more people. I just don't buy it coming from him. Anyway, that's it. So y'all make your minds up. Keep the reparations conversation going. I hope he continues to force the reparations conversation onto Joe Biden. I hope he amplifies the conversation among all the other third-party candidates. I don't believe Robert F. Kennedy's running a left-wing campaign, so I'm not going to call him the other left-wing candidates, but he's certainly running a third-party candidacy. I hope he keeps it going. But don't be seduced or tricked, especially us black people. Don't be seduced and tricked into thinking that because this man is asking us for black stuff, or he's advocating for black stuff, that he's mentioning some black stuff. Don't use that to ignore the fact that he basically is still invested in American imperialism. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is still invested in Zionism. He's still invested in sustaining the same system, the same status quo that has us where we are right now. So we ain't going to have no parts of that.